the best of Money Matters. Money Matters with Hong Bin Zheng and Chua Tian Tian.
This is Money Matters with Hong Bin Zheng and Chua Tian Tian, bringing you your 2025 budget conversation. And joining us, we have our panelist, Terence Ho, Associate Professor in Practice at Singapore University of Social Sciences, as well as Nicholas Fang, Director of Security and Global Affairs at Singapore Institute of International Affairs, as well as the Managing Director of Strategic Consultancy at Black Dot. Now, we've already discussed several key highlights of the budget, including the SG60 package, what support will be given to all Singaporeans to tackle cost pressures, the support that will be given to workers in terms of upskilling and lifelong learning, as well as how our growth frontier, our businesses, will be advanced. And now finally, let's take a look at how Singapore is building itself into a city of sustainability as well as an inclusive society. I mean, the government has reaffirmed its commitment to building a sustainable and resilient city. And one of the key areas the Singapore government has focused on is the decarbonization of the transport sector, which currently accounts for about 15% of the country's total emissions. This is what PM Lawrence Wong has said about it.
To accelerate the adoption of clean, heavy vehicles, we will introduce a new heavy vehicle zero emission scheme and an electric heavy vehicle charger grant. These schemes will provide incentives for the purchase of the heavy vehicle and co-funding of the charging infrastructure.
All right. So to begin our conversation with the introduction of the two new schemes, Heavy Vehicle Zero Emission Scheme and Electric Heavy Vehicle Charge Grant. Nicholas, how do you think, these will help accelerate the adoption of electric heavy vehicle in Singapore's transport sector?
I think first and foremost, we always have to remember one of the key challenges facing businesses when it comes to adoption of green tech is how to balance their green line with their bottom line. To a certain extent, they have to figure out how adoption of technologies that might be good for the environment potentially will be good for their business as well. So quite often in the bid to sort of nudge these companies and encourage them along, important for the government to signal through schemes and incentives which direction they hope the market will move in. So, to that end, the two new schemes, the Heavy Vehicles Zero Emission Scheme and the Electric Heavy Vehicle Charger Grant, providing incentives not just to buy heavy vehicles, electric vehicles, but also co-funding the charging infrastructure, will go some way to alleviating some of the financial concerns that businesses might face when it comes to such deploying such technology as well. But, PM Wong did address the issue or agree that, there's one of the challenges is limited model availability. So we don't see a huge range that might be suitable for all different requirements for all different businesses. And of course, the less accessible charging infrastructure, which even on the civilian side, I hear is still a bit of a challenge for people when it comes to considering whether to buy an EV right now today. So I think that definitely has to improve going forward before we see more widespread adoption.
Right. Well, to fund infrastructure and maintain tax parity, the government introduced an additional flat component for EVs, and the AFC will be set at $250 for electric heavy goods vehicles and $190 for electric minibuses and $550 for large buses. Now, from a policy perspective here, Terence, do you think this approach is effective in maintaining fairness while driving EV adoption? And how do you think this gradual implementation encourages people to continue investing in EVs?
Yeah, I think it recognizes that, using any vehicle, whether electric or otherwise, in addition, there are always congestion costs, or what economists would call externalities as well. So for the fuel, of course, the excise duties are meant for both control of the usage of congestion as well as the emissions. And it's only fair that even for EVs, which are better from the emissions point of view, but they also impose costs on other road users in terms of congestion, that be taken into account. And of course, this additional usage charge may sort of be somewhat of disincentive for take of EVs, but that's offset by the additional support for the asset and infrastructure, including including the charging. So I think it's quite a well-considered approach in that sense.
I see. Well, speaking of the new AFC road tax for electric heavy goods, vehicles and buses, we did not really observe a lot of other tax collections in this year's budget. So maybe, Nick, you can comment on this. For a budget that focuses on the future, why isn't the government collecting more tax? Shouldn't we, future-proof our reserves? Where could the government have implemented more tax?
Well, I guess it depends on what future you're talking about. Are you talking, for the next 5 years, or are you talking for the next few months when we potentially might expect a general election in Singapore? I think, not to be cynical, but any sort of measure to announce increased taxes potentially won't necessarily go down very well in this. It never goes down very well.
Right.
And PM Wong did actually seek to explain the fact that the government has done quite well in balancing the budget, and one of the big reasons for the collections, it was the corporate income tax collections, which increased significantly in the last 2 years. Previously at about 3.2% of GDP, and now projected to reach 4.1% in FY 2024. So, his point of view was that this is slightly unexpected, and we're still not entirely sure if it's going to be long-term or not. But with the already announced GST increases and the measures put in place to sort of cushion Singaporeans from that, I think the outlook is that there's no need to introduce any sort of new measures currently as well. So, to a certain extent, that is prudent and also forward-looking of the government.
If I may add on, I don't think there's a need for sort of tax measures in that sense for every budget, but we have to look at the sort of overall, over several budgets, what's been done to raise revenue. And I think the government is still digesting the impact of global tax rule changes on Singapore. And so it's important that while we look at revenue as well, every effort must be made in terms of looking at the spending, how well it's spent, and investing in the future.
I see. Well, Singapore is also investing $60 billion to expand and renew its rail network, and an additional $1 billion to enhance bus services. Terence, how do these public transport investments align with the long-term sustainability and urban planning efforts, and how will these initiatives reduce the reliance on private vehicles and lower overall emissions?
So I think the public transport is really the needle mover when it comes to sort of greening our transport system. And it's extremely important if we want us to be a car-light society, and we want to tell people that you don't really need to own a private vehicle, that the public transport system is actually efficient, reliable and affordable. And so these investments would certainly contribute towards that.
I always believe, and I have to bang on about my own personal sort of pet hope, is that we see Singapore transitioning a bit more to become a cycling-friendly nation. And I think that, if we can encourage a greater cycling component in our daily lifestyles, whether it's a way of commuting to work and stuff like that, I understand that infrastructure does need to improve a little bit, but critically, I think it's a mindset issue as well. The conditions we have in Singapore, the quality of our roads, and usually our weather mean that we are far better positioned than some Nordic countries where cycling is a big part of their daily lives, even with winter, sort of seasons. And if we could do that, we might reduce, healthcare costs, we will reduce congestion on the roads. It's definitely more car light in terms of the traffic mix, maybe more healthy people as well. So maybe we could look at that too at some point.
Well, the government is definitely making moves to building Singapore into a more sustainable city. But of course, we all need to do our part. And there is also a recent enhancement on the climate-friendly households program in the budget by providing an additional $100 worth of climate vouchers. Nicholas, do you think these incentives are enough in promoting a more sustainable lifestyle? What more could have been done to push the population to adopt a more sustainable lifestyle?
I think this is a perennial question. I think the general understanding is that because we are a small country with a small population, even if everybody, decided to go complete carbon neutral, carbon zero in terms of emissions, on a global scale, we would move a very, very, very tiny percentage of the needle. So many Singaporeans say, so really, what difference does it make whether I adopt this? So, the typical way of incentivizing people is through their wallets with the additional $100 worth of climate vouchers. Hopefully, people will start thinking about acquiring products that are a little bit more sustainable and more efficient. And then once they are sort of entrenched in their lifestyles, then hopefully it becomes the norm for more people. So I think it's a move towards that, but mindset change tends to require a generational type of time period. So the good thing is I think a lot of young people today, for them, sustainability is a massive concern. And if now their parents or their families are looking at these vouchers and saying, okay, let's try different things that we can do to move the needle, that might be good. But I suspect it would require a longer term effort to continue reinforcing to people why it's important for everybody to play their part.
Definitely. Well, other than building Singapore into a sustainable city, the government is also making moves to build Singapore into a more inclusive society. Now, this budget aims to better support caregivers of elderly as well. Terrence, one of which is by, enhancing the Home Caregiving Grant in terms of monetary value and qualifying criteria. So is this something that will be enough in the long run?
Yeah, so certainly a 50% increase in the grant would be welcome, and I was quite heartened by this move, but I think it has to be viewed in a broader context as well. So there should be other initiatives, including expanding the number of different care models that could be available, whether it's particularly for home care. And I think holistically, if we can move on all these fronts, I think then we would see an impact.
I see. Well, there is an expectation of at least 80,000 elderly to benefit from the schemes enhanced or introduced in Budget 2025. Nicholas, does this signal Singapore's readiness on creating an inclusive society where our elderly will be at the forefront of Singaporean society?
I think it's been one of the hallmarks, the speeches by our new Prime Minister since he took over last year. Looking at his different speeches, I noticed that consistently he pushes out the message or the emphasis on the need to be inclusive, the need to think about different groups such as the disabled, the elderly, and I think that this again is sort of in keeping with where his priorities are. The Singapore government, of course, tends to run itself not just based on individual personalities or preferences, but there has been a very strong signaling that Singapore does value being inclusive, open, where all demographics not just necessarily can age well, but potentially can even contribute and continue contributing, especially as we face aging population much longer into their lives as well. So I think that was very heartening to see the 80,000 seniors expected to benefit from the various long-term care subsidies and grants, but also all the different efforts put in place to empower persons with disabilities as well. And I think that really goes some way to walk the talk when it comes to building, this inclusive Singapore where we all sort of take care of one another and nobody gets left behind, which is a constant narrative for the government.
Well, touching upon that, I mean, the government is aiming to empower persons with disabilities by providing more financial support. For instance, increasing and raising the maximum qualifying per capita household income for subsidy rates for adult disability services. Terrence, do you think this is the government's way of, preparing persons with disabilities to enter and support the aging workforce?
I think the emphasis is really on helping them beyond the schooling age so that when they leave school and transition to adulthood, they would be, in a sense, best able to take care of themselves. And I think many caregivers, in particular of persons with disabilities, they do express concern what happens after they pass on. And really this is about securing the future in several ways, whether it's entering the workforce, building up the retirement savings, or building up the trust accounts. So I think this is definitely in the right direction.
I see. Well, that was our conversation on how Singapore is building itself into a city of sustainability as well as an inclusive society with our panelists Terrence Ho, Associate Professor in Practice at Singapore University of Social Sciences, and Nicholas Fang, Director of Security and Global Affairs at the Singapore Institute of International Affairs and Managing Director of Strategic Consultancy at Black Dot.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.